Realm and Man by Spiers. Copyright 2018. Part 4. Genesis 15:15, Authorized King James Version, AKJV. 15. And thou shalt go to thy fathers in peace. Thou shalt be buried in a good old age. Genesis 28:21, Authorized King James Version, AKJV. 21. So that I come again to my father's house in peace, then shall the Lord be my God. Genesis 41:16, Authorized King James Version, AKJV. 16. And Joseph answered Pharaoh, saying, It is not in me. God shall give Pharaoh an answer of peace. Matthew 5:9, Authorized King James Version, AKJV. 9. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. When we look at the state of affairs in the Commonwealth of Australia and everything that linked us back to the laws of armed conflict and administration under the rules of usufruct, and the Commonwealth of Australia is signatory to conventions going back to Hague Conventions in 1907, and then look at the Commonwealth of Australia on a global scale, we start to see a larger picture emerge out of what was once just a struggle at the law, which is according to James 2:9, partaking in sin. Throughout Genesis, we see that coming home to the gods of our forefathers means acting in the name of our fathers in peace. Genesis 28:21 is very particular in the order of returning to the Father's home in peace, and then the Lord becomes his God. Matthew 5:9 is also specific in a blessing that the peacemakers shall be called the children of God. And in the current world stance, with treaties and conventions locking the rules of engagement, we can see through peace treaty at the Treaty of Versailles in 1919, the Commonwealth of Australia, in line with its newly adopted covenant of the League of Nations, became entrusted to the now formed United Nations. Genesis 41:16 shows that your actions are relative to God being your birthright by inheritance of your father's will, Jacob stating to Pharaoh that his birthright will answer for him. If we refer back to the laws of armed conflict and look at General Orders 100 of the United States Army in the Lieber Code, still in effect through Field Manual FM 2470, we can see that peace becomes a central part of declaring one's own standing. Lieber Code, Article 155. All enemies in regular war are divided into two general classes, that is to say, into combatants and non-combatants or unarmed citizens of the hostile government. The military commander of the legitimate government in a war of rebellion distinguishes between the loyal citizens in the revolt portion of the country and the disloyal citizens. The disloyal citizens may further be classified into those citizens known to sympathize with the rebellion without positively aiding it, and those who, without taking up arms, give positive aid and comfort to the rebellious enemy without being bodily forced thereto. As an occupied people, with Abraham Lincoln's administration style in place through administration under Hague Conventions, and the direct presence of the United States Naval Fleet in the waters of the Commonwealth of Australia in 1908, not forgetting the change in flag in 1908, putting an additional point on the star in the lower left canton, the people are divided into classes of combatants and non-combatants, being unarmed citizens. This is then further classified by dividing the loyal citizens from the disloyal citizens. Disloyalty is divided by category again into sympathizers and supporters of any rebellion. We know from Article 55 of Hague Conventions 4 that executive control is by right of treaty for administration under the rules of usufruct, and through Treaty of Versailles borders were realigned and the Commonwealth of Australia born of its own realm. We can see under the Hague Conventions that attempting to compel the occupied people to change their allegiance is forbidden. So, what of the change of nationality into citizenship? And further, to the change of allegiance, oath, parliamentary oath, national anthem, royal honours system, and everything else that came along under the coverage of the Gough Whitlam Labor government. Hague 4, Article 45. It is forbidden to compel the inhabitants of occupied territory to swear allegiance to a hostile power. Article 46. Family honour and rights, the lives of persons and private property, as well as religious convictions and practice must be respected. Private property cannot be confiscated. Article 47. Pillage is formally forbidden. Under Hague Conventions, we can see that regardless of classification as belligerent or non-belligerent, the right to live with family and hold private property and carry on your faith free from pillage is respected. Although, as we can see through the Liber Code at Article 156, this becomes limited by what is known as the burdens of warfare. Liber Code Article 156. Common justice and plain expediency require that the military commander protect the manifestly loyal citizens in revolted territories against the hardships of the war as much as the common misfortune of all war admits. The commander will throw the burden of the war, as much as lies within his power, on the disloyal citizens of the revolt portion or province, subjecting them to a stricter police than the non-combatant enemies have to suffer in regular war. And if he deems it appropriate, or if his government demands of him that every citizen shall, by an oath of allegiance or by some other manifest act, declare his fidelity to the legitimate government, he may expel, transfer, imprison, or fine the revolted citizens who refuse to pledge themselves anew as citizens obedient to the law and loyal to the government. Whether it is expedient to do so, or whether reliance can be placed upon such oaths, the commander or his government have the right to decide. Common justice provides that the commander protects the loyal citizens as compared to the disloyal citizens. Because of your loyalty unto the God of your fathers, as sons of the Commonwealth of Australia and the inheritance of its birthright, you are protected as much as the misfortune of war as is possible. After this, the term collateral damage may be coined as reason for damages or death incurred during conflict. The disloyal citizens are left to the burden of war, at the full force of the power that lies in the commander. Policy is created under the rules of administration and then enforced by policy enforcers known as police. When we look a little further into Article 156, wherein it states, "And if he deems it appropriate, or if his government demands of him that every citizen shall, by an oath of allegiance, or by some other manifest act, declare his fidelity to the legitimate government, he may expel, transfer, imprison, or fine the revolted citizens who refuse to pledge themselves anew as citizens obedient to the law and loyal to the government." The statement is in conflict to later signed Hague Conventions detailing administration under the rules of usufruct. Article 45. It is forbidden to compel the inhabitants of occupied territory to swear allegiance to the hostile power. The first part of Article 156 now alludes to the fact that police are the burden of war. The police enforce policy created by policymakers in state and federal governments, which we define to be under administration and martial law after the presence of the United States naval fleets in the waters of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland post-conflict between the two over many wars of aggression in the century previous. Throughout this white paper, we have come to the core links to the Oath of Allegiance and the royal law that defines a line of authority through the monarch to the Governor General and subsequently all oath of office down from that apex. When we look into the line of authority of the New South Wales Police Force, something strange seems to be apparent, which after reading to this point so far, may now not seem so strange after all. We can see by this image of the New South Wales Police Coat of Arms that it is topped with a St Edward's crown, the Security Administration via Australian business number listed below, topped with a crown that is shown to be linked through Flags Act 1954 to the Military Orders of 1908. This followed by ABN number linked through ASIC in Memorandum of Understanding with the US SEC and the major four banks in SEC registrations of surety for the Commonwealth of Australia. When a citizen decides he is going to join the New South Wales Police Force, he is first asked for all the associated identification which is under the jurisdiction of the state to be able to be party to the state's police force in the first place. After a cadet has passed training and initially given the go-ahead to perform duties, that cadet takes an oath of allegiance followed by an oath of office. They are not required to do this in a promotion or job change wherein they have taken the same oath previously. The Oaths Act 1900 in New South Wales still applies, as can be seen here in its current version valid in 2017, wherein at Section 6 of the Act the name of the Sovereign is detailed as the head of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland, as per the Commonwealth of Australia Constitution Act July 1900 UK PGA, and in line with Clause 5 of that Act. This puts the display of the St Edward's crown on the New South Wales coat of arms outside of the realm or birthright under Queen Victoria, as already demonstrated. The Oaths Act New South Wales 1900 cannot apply to any officer whom is under the St Edward's crown when within the Act itself is defined the realm and kingdom being the birthright of Queen Victoria, her heirs and successors being Edward VII and George V, who so left behind a crown anchored to hallowed ground, linking the realm to the Commonwealth of Australia in the name of the Sons of the Commonwealth of Australia being the Australian and New Zealand Army Corps, affectionately known as ANZAC. Oaths Act 1900 No. 20. Current version for 25 September 2017 to date. Accessed 10 June 2018 at 15:03. 4. Oath of Allegiance. The form in the second schedule shall, subject to Section 6, be the form of oath of allegiance taken by all persons liable to take the said oath. Name of Sovereign. The name of the Sovereign of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland shall be substituted in the said form from time to time instead of the name of Her Majesty. Further, in the Oaths Act New South Wales 1900 at Section 7, we see that the Oath of Allegiance followed by the Oath of Office stems from the Governor of the New South Wales, who defines the line of authority through Clause 5 of the Commonwealth of Australia Constitution Act July 1900 UK PGA. 7. Public Officers. 1. The oath of allegiance and the official oath shall be tendered to and taken by all public officers required by order of the government to take the same. 2. Repealed. Further, in the Oaths Act New South Wales 1900, at Section 11, we see that declining or neglecting to take the oath of allegiance and oath of office, as the Act itself states, the officer shall vacate the officer if already participating in it or be disqualified from doing so. As we can see by the second and third schedule of the Oaths Act 1900 New South Wales, still valid as of September 2017, The oath of allegiance and the oath of office are to the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland under Queen Victoria, her heirs and successors being George VII, Edward VII, and George V. 11. Penalty on not taking required oath. 1. If any such officer as foresaid liable to take any such oath declines or neglects, when the same is duly tendered to take such oath, the officer shall, if the officer has already into on his or her office, vacate the same, and if the officer has not entered on the same, be disqualified from doing so. 2. But no person shall be compelled in respect of the same appointment to the same office to take such oath more than once. Second Schedule Oath of Allegiance. I name, do swear that I will be faithful to bear true allegiance to Her Majesty Queen Victoria, her heirs and successors, according to law, so help me God. Third Schedule Official Oath. I, insert name, do swear that I will well and truly serve Her Majesty Queen Victoria in the office or department, so help me God. This puts any New South Wales police officer outside of oath of allegiance and oath of office just for wearing a uniform, in which we have been told by royal law not to allow within the Commonwealth of Australia. A definitive conundrum for the policy enforcers operating under the auspices of an Australian business number in attempts to notice for monetary gain on behalf of the state, which is not linked to the birthright as left by Queen Victoria, as already demonstrated in the earlier sections of this paper. As a final note on the links to the Oath of Allegiance, as the laws of armed conflict have mentioned the oaths of allegiance and the creation of the Commonwealth of Australia is central to oaths of allegiance through the Governor-General of the Commonwealth of Australia and the monarch through oath of allegiance before the will of Almighty God, we look at the affirmation. According to the Oaths Act, New South Wales 1900, the declaration by way of affirmation is subject to the Evidence Act 1995, putting the realm of an oath subject to the giving of evidence and not in the allegiance with the monarch or the birthright being realm defended and self-determined by ANZAC. 13. Declaration or affirmation instead of oath. 1. Subject to the Evidence Act 1995, whenever any person, A, called as a witness in any court or before any judge or magistrate or other person authorized to administer an oath, whether in a civil or criminal proceedings, or B, having to make a statement in any information, complaint or proceeding in any court or before any judge or magistrate, or C, required or desired to make an affidavit or deposition, objects to take an oath, or is reasonably objected to as incompetent to take an oath, or appears to such court or judge or magistrate or person so authorized incompetent to take an oath, the person may in lieu of such oath, I, when so called as a witness, make a declaration in the form in the 6th schedule, or 2, in any other case, make a solemn affirmation in the form in the 7th schedule. 2. Whatsoever, having made such declaration or affirmation wilfully gives any false evidence before such court, judge, or magistrate, or person so authorized, or makes any false statements in such information, complaint, proceeding, affidavit, or deposition, knowing the same to be false, shall be deemed guilty of perjury if the evidence or statement, had it been on oath, would by law have been perjury. When we look back at section 155 and 156 of the Labour Code, we begin to see that loyalty and disloyalty play a very large role in the core of being an occupied people. Through the actions of history and the presence of war fleets and the continuation through Gough Whitlam and the current Australia have our loyalties become confused over the last 50 or 100 years. Has an occupying power tricked you into a new allegiance, going against Hague Conventions it is party to in 1907? How did the Treaty of Versailles and subsequently Imperial Conference 1926 affect the Commonwealth of Australia? All very serious questions in the grand scheme of what is, as per Hague Conventions, an occupied and administered Commonwealth of Australia under the rules of usufruct. The Commonwealth of Australia is always told, on the going down of the sun in the morning, we will remember them, and the year 1919 is thrown around as we sing out the words lest we forget. Genesis 15:12-14, Authorised King James Versions, AKJV. 12. And when the sun was going down, a deep sleep fell upon Abram, and lo, a horror of darkness, great darkness fell upon him. And he said unto Abram, Know of a surety that thy seed shall be a stranger in a land that is not theirs, and shall serve them, and they shall afflict them 400 years. And also that nation whom they shall serve will I judge, and afterwards shall they come out with great substance. Genesis 15:14 is very relevant in stating, and also that nation whom they shall serve will I judge. This is relevant to Genesis 41:16, where that peace is given by the God of your fathers. Genesis 14:16, Authorised King James Version, AKJV. 16. And Joseph answered Pharaoh, saying, It is not in me. God shall give Pharaoh an answer of peace. It is ironic when we look back at the wording in the Labour Code relevant to the disloyal citizen. The commander will throw the burdens of war, as much as lies within his power, on the disloyal citizens. Compare that to the Oaths Act New South Wales 1900, in which every New South Wales police officer is supposed to be under, including by definition the kingdom by Queen Victoria, the name of the sovereign of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland shall, followed by an oath to the monarch under God. I, insert name, do swear that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to Her Majesty Queen Victoria, her heirs and successors according to law, so help me God. By defining the specific birthright and line of authority under the imperial crown, to which, as per the Bible at Genesis 15, along with the demonstration symbolically at the Shrine of Remembrance, is linked to the St. Edward's crown by way of administration. The above coin printed commemoratively by the Perth Mint in Australia shows Queen Elizabeth II on observe of both coins, the front of each showing the anniversary of each crown realm, being 60 years by coronation of Queen Elizabeth II, and by 175 years by coronation of Queen Victoria, her heirs and successors, being Edward VII and George V. This is a unique conundrum for the police officer himself, who is now subject to the burden of war himself for his disloyalty to the birthright at which is being administered. The police officer failing to take oath of office by wearing a crown foreign to the imperial crown linked to the oath of allegiance in the New South Wales Oath Act 1900 now puts the officer out of office completely as per section 11 as the actor's penalty for not taking the required oath. Now, the New South Wales police officer is imitating an officer of the Commonwealth of Australia outside of the realm of the imperial crown and outside the oath of allegiance to the birthright of Queen Victoria, with New South Wales under the Commonwealth of Australia Constitution at Clause 9 of the Commonwealth of Australia Constitution Act July 1900, in adherence to Clause 5 and Clause 8 of said Act, New South Wales has a line of authority to federal laws relating to the imitation of public officers. This is quite a conundrum, given that we can see that the burdens of war are pushed by police officers in the name of the St. Edward's Crown being a foreign realm and kingdom of the birthright of the imperial crown, so left through Queen Victoria, her heirs and successors in lineage from George I. This now impacts on the everyday citizen, the civilian on the street, who has to go to work to feed a family to survive in the limited rules set that they are allowed to do so, and most obviously to the fact that the rules set around them even exist. A literal invisible prison around the population in ignorance of their belligerents, spending the Commonwealth of Australia into perpetual debt through the use of the currencies of the Reserve Bank of Australia. Using the example of the New South Wales police enforcer openly flaunting its ABN as a credible avenue of authority, let us delve into an example of usufruct and the burdens of war, which is at the discretion of the commanding officer. Many believe the system is to be just that of contracting, but the sheer fact is police wouldn't actually exist without the requirement to enforce policies that, when strictly speaking, aren't royally assented laws according to the correct line of authority, as we continue to demonstrate. Transportation in the modern world is commonplace. Everyone has the convenience of owning an automobile for the purpose of private travel, and many have attempted to play the argument in relation to the name and title of the driver's license and the requirements to not have one or not. Whether individual arguments are successful or not are outside of this paper. The purpose here is to demonstrate why, at the core, these things are happening within your society. Liber Code, Article 26. Commanding generals may cause the magistrates and civil officers of the hostile country to take the oath of temporary allegiance or an oath of fidelity to their own victorious government or rulers, and they may expel everyone who declines to do so. But whether they do so or not, the people and their civil officers owe strict obedience to them as long as they hold sway over the district or country at the peril of their lives. We can see that civil officers of the occupied country owe a temporary allegiance or oath of fidelity to the occupying government. Of particular importance is the magistrates suffer the same impedance, and at the peril of their lives, putting the magistrate and civil officer in a unique position at international war in that their life is at direct impact. Military administration oversees the transportation of consigned goods around the territories that are occupied. The flow of merchandise and tradable items becomes monitored, and national security is put in reserve to protect that of the administration instead of the de jure of occupied parliament. The flow of real property is monitored and the transfer of title managed under the military abeyance, which is martial law. As a citizen who travels the king's highways and byways, your actions are now under the military watch of an administrating power enforcing obligations and liabilities on you under the rules of usufruct. It is in disloyalty to the Commonwealth of Australia under the Commonwealth of Australia Constitution Act July 1900 UK PGA, putting you in the realm of the imperial crown in the birthright left for you through Queen Victoria, her heirs and successors, being Edward VII and George V. Let us pose a situation familiar to the reader. Imagine travelling down the highway. You are minding your own business, causing no one any harm. You are maintaining control of your automobile, and the traffic is flowing adequately. A man in a vehicle displaying New South Wales coat of arms turns on blue and red flashing lights, followed by highly audible sirens, pulls his car in behind you, following you down the highway with intent to obstruct or impede your travel. You pull over to the side of the ride, the state vehicle pulling in behind you, which today's technology you are now on camera. All audio being recorded, the vehicle loaded to the hilt with computers and communications electronics, in irony of what you are allowed to do in your automobile. The man walks up to you wearing a uniform. You assume him to be an officer with some line of authority to what you know as the state of New South Wales, as well as a line of authority to what you know as the Commonwealth of Australia. The usual interactions of winding down a window to speak to the man occur with some sort of interaction on behalf of the state. The man is a policy enforcer, enforcing the policies created by the state of New South Wales to be obeyed by all who are within the boundaries of New South Wales. Although, in this very concept, we have a conundrum given Clause 8 of the Commonwealth of Australia Constitution Act, July 1900 UK PGA, and the repeal of the Colonial Boundaries Act 1875, removing any border from New South Wales as at Constitution on the 1st of January 1901. The man proceeds to provide you with a notice, what you commonly refer to as a ticket, issued on behalf of the Crown, at which he displays on his shoulder, which is now in conflict with the Oaths Act New South Wales 1900, and the route line of authority matching the Commonwealth of Australia Constitution Act July 1900 UK PGA, and the birthright by Queen Victoria as defined different to the line of authority to that of the St. Edward's Crown. The state of New South Wales, in which the Oaths Act New South Wales 1900 is a valid instrument at law as at September 2017, printed June 2018, has created policy now enforced by a man who has impeded your travel on behalf of the state, whom employed the man to impede your travel to enforce upon you policy created by the state, is now in conflict with his own Oaths Act New South Wales 1900, making the line of authority of the Government of New South Wales questionable on its own. Acts Interpretation Act 1901 to 1966. An act for the interpretation of Acts of Parliament and for shortening their language. Be it enacted by the King's most excellent Majesty, the Senate and the House of Representatives of the Commonwealth of Australia as follows. 17. In any act, unless the contrary intention appears, A. The Commonwealth shall mean the Commonwealth of Australia. B. Australia includes the whole of the Commonwealth. C. The Constitution shall mean the Constitution of the Commonwealth. D. The Constitution Act shall mean the Commonwealth of Australia Constitution Act. E. The Parliament shall mean the Parliament of the Commonwealth. 18. In any act, unless the contrary intention appears, A. The United Kingdom shall mean the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland. B. British possession shall mean any part of the King's dominions exclusive of the United Kingdom, and where parts of such dominions are under both a central and a local legislature, all parts under the central legislature shall, for the purposes of this definition, be deemed to be 1. British possession. As per the Acts Interpretation Act 1966 to 1973, the United Kingdom by definition is to mean the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland, and as we discussed in the first section of this paper, we can define this to be separate to the current United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and now relative to a state being New South Wales through its Oaths Act New South Wales 1900, still in force as at June 2018. Showing the same line of authority in line with Clause 5 of the Commonwealth of Australia Constitution Act, July 1900, UK PGA. We can see now the conundrum of this notice or ticket for monetary revenue for the enforcement of policy, as the state collects the funds which we can now see are directly connected to the burdens of warfare through the police officer, conflict between his New South Wales legislated oath of allegiance and oath of office, putting him out of office and not in the jurisdiction of an officer for New South Wales, although under laws of armed conflict is serving two masters with an oath of fidelity to a crown not imperial and foreign to the birthright through Queen Victoria, her heirs and successors. This notice is now linked to monetary reward, which triggers the offending disloyal citizen to have to provide financial benefit to the state for policies created by the state in which that citizen is a resident. The receiver of the notice now has to participate in some sort of labour or loss of value in order to pay off the state enforced and state created policy. We have already discussed the State of New South Wales obligations to the Commonwealth of Australia through Financial Agreements Act 1928 and its ties to Section 105A of the Commonwealth of Australia Constitution changed in 1927 referendum on state debts following previous referendums on state debts in 1910. And we all see the actions of police officers of New South Wales issuing notices on the highways of the state of New South Wales, a Commonwealth territory after Constitution. We can show through the associated facts that the state of New South Wales is in debts to which, through changes to the Constitution by referendum, the Commonwealth of Australia took control of the administration of state debts. And now we have a conflict in a police officer acting on behalf of the state of New South Wales, issuing financial burden on behalf of the state of New South Wales in conflict of the Oaths Act New South Wales 1900. Matthew 6:24, Authorised King James Version, AKJV. 24. No man can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will hold to one and despise the other. Ye cannot serve God and mammon. When the police officer issues you with a ticket, he asks you for identification so that he can tie your name to the state to be able to enforce the orders of the state of New South Wales through policy created by the state of New South Wales. Although given what we have demonstrated here, we can be sure on the line of authority within the state of New South Wales. Matthew 6:24 is very clear on serving two masters. Is the police officer clear on his oath of office? The identification is where many believe the birth certificate becomes central to the name game that the policy enforcer is playing on behalf of the state. So far we can see there is a direct conundrum with the line of authority in the very officer being in any form of office in the first place, let alone having authority to bind you by name. It is the state of New South Wales that makes the assumption that you were required to obtain a driver's licence in the first place. It is also the state of New South Wales using policy enforcers to enforce policy created by the state of New South Wales, putting financial burden on civilians of the Commonwealth of Australia. Clause 8 of the Commonwealth of Australia Constitution Act, July 1900 UK PGA, repealed the Colonial Boundaries Act 1875, leaving the state of New South Wales without a border as civilians united in a federal body called the Commonwealth of Australia. So, what is the jurisdiction of the New South Wales policy enforcer on civilians of the Commonwealth of Australia? And what is a state of the Commonwealth of Australia, formerly a colony with its own border, now repealed? If the state has no borders, and under Clause 5 of the Commonwealth of Australia Constitution Act, July 1900, UK PGA, has its line of authority in the Constitution at Clause 9 of said Act, then what exactly is a state of the Commonwealth of Australia? In the preamble to the Commonwealth of Australia Constitution Act 1900 UK PGA, Queen Victoria details expedient adoption of new states into the Commonwealth of Australia. Why would Queen Victoria expect this to be done promptly? Why was it never done? Have we here a policy enforcer of the state of New South Wales by the face of its acting on behalf of the St Edward's Crown through Royal Powers Act 1953, taking royal power over the Kingdom of Australia, United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland, and the Imperial Crown anchored to hallowed ground? Although under the Oaths Act New South Wales 1900, this same said officer is now under oath to the state of New South Wales, still of the Imperial Crown. Luke 16:13, Authorised King James Version, AKJV 13. No man can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will hold to one and despise the other. Ye cannot serve God and mammon.